Well, good afternoon, everyone. Go ahead and get started. Welcome to our audience here in Glasgow and also to our viewers coming in online. I'm Pedro Pizarro, and I am President and CEO of Edison International. We are the parent company of both Southern California Edison, a utility serving 15 million residents in Southern California, and Edison Energy, our competitive business working with large corporate and industrial clients. I'm also Vice Chairman of the Edison Electric Institute, so I'm happy to be here representing my fellow members across investor-owned utilities in the United States and elsewhere. So it's a real honor to moderate the discussion today on Energy Day here at COP26. When you think about America's electric companies, they've reduced their carbon emissions 40% since 2005. And today, 40% of the electricity in the US comes from clean, carbon-free resources, including nuclear, hydro, wind, and solar energy. Been a lot of good progress. We're on a good path towards our low carbon future, but we all know we need to do a whole lot more across the country and globally. So we're stepping up for the challenge as part of our commitment to the clean energy transition. Across EEI, nearly 50 EEI members have announced long-term carbon reduction goals, and that includes 35 companies who are targeting zero carbon emissions by 2050 or sooner. And I'm proud to know that Edison International has committed to net zero by 2045 across our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And Southern California Edison will be delivering 100% carbon-free power to retail customers by 2045. So while we see that clear path out there for the transition, we know that it's going to require new technologies to get to net zero carbon with 24/7 operations and the technologies to back that up. Big challenge, but I'm fortunate to be joined here today by two industry leaders who are very much focused on that topic, and particularly how we think about new technologies to help accelerate the path to 100% clean energy. First, we have Arshad Mansour, our good friend, who's a president and CEO of the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI. And full disclosure, I'm a board member at EPRI, so Arshad knows how to screen my calls. And we also have Leo Moreno, who is president of AES Clean Energy, and they're focused on deploying clean energy, energy storage, and new technologies across the US and around the world. So Leo, Arshad, great to have you guys join me. I'm going to start off with a brief overview of an EEI initiative called the Carbon Free Technology Initiative, and then I'm going to turn to a discussion with Arshad and Leo. Given the long lead times in developing and commercializing technologies and the long planning horizons that electric companies need to have, EEI and member companies and a variety of NGO partners have come together to launch CFTI. And the partners are a great group. It's by the Bipartisan Policy Center, the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, the Clean Air Task Force, Clear Path Action, the Great Plains Institute, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, the Nuclear Energy Institute, and Third Way. And so this great group of NGOs and EEI came together to identify and advocate for specific policy proposals that can help ensure that we get commercial availability for key technology areas and get that early enough that they can be deployed in a way to meet net zero reduction goals when we need them. And it's also to ensure that electricity remains affordable and reliable for our customers. Because if we have a clean energy transition that's just clean and it's not reliable and affordable, it's not a very good transition. So the areas of focus right now include advanced dispatchable renewables like super hot deep geothermal, advanced wind and solar, advanced power electronics to help with that, zero carbon fuels like hydrogen or ammonia from a variety of resources, advanced nuclear energy, both fission and fusion, carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, especially for natural gas generation, and advanced demand efficiency and long duration storage. And so we've had a number of policy proposals that have been developed for each of these 5 technology areas. And they're all at various stages of the research, development, demonstration, and deployment cycle in the marketplace. So, but focusing on this RD&D and making sure that it's funded is going to be a multi-year effort for the partners. And this really goes then into the annual appropriations process, program reauthorizations, and tax policy at the government level. So we want to make sure that we can achieve this across R&D, across demonstration projects, first of a kind through nth of a kind. And we recognize that N depends on the technology. Some technologies may be a smaller N, so may need a larger N. Deployment, you really have to move beyond commercial scale, beyond initial commercial scale demonstrations toward full commercialization and competitiveness. And then finally, we're focused on the ecosystem required to bring together all the parties that are needed and to make sure that the marketplace has all the players it needs to get the right cost and performance attributes for each technology. So some of the specific policy proposals from CFTI to date include tripling the level of funding for R&D at the U.S. Department of Energy over the next 5 years, including through ARPA-E and the national labs. And beyond those first 5 years, continuing to increase. Having dedicated programs and initiatives at DOE focused on each of the technology areas to help accelerate their development and get new mechanisms in place for public and private sector collaboration, including state and local entities, because a lot of the action happens grassroots at home. Establishing consortia with collaboration and knowledge sharing across federal agencies, the national labs, and other non-governmental and entities with expertise to bring to the table. And getting alternative cost sharing formulas for demonstration projects that might not necessarily be just a simple 50-50 split. For example, some early stage project development might benefit from an 80-20 cost share. Might be more appropriate for it. And finally, getting the right financial incentives for investing and deployment of the technologies. And this could be technology neutral production or investment tax credits with monetization, loan guarantees, grants, secure loans, and other clever ideas out there. So we've already started to see some of this work come to fruition, and the most recent budget that was put forward by the Biden administration significantly increased funding for clean energy technology, RD&D. So we're excited about that. The bipartisan infrastructure bill also includes several of CFTI's recommendations on tax credits and innovative financing, and all of this can help spur additional deployment of clean energy at a significant scale. So if I sound excited about it, it's because I am, and we're excited that this is just one piece of the broader suite of efforts that we need and that are underway across the U.S. So with that kind of background of CFTI, I know that that's not the only thing going on. We have lots of other things going on through EPRI, through AES. So Arshad, let me start with you, and maybe you can tell us a bit about EPRI's low carbon research initiative, which I think is really complementary to the CFTI effort.
Thank you, Pedro. Very, very complimentary. For those of you joining online, welcome. And those of you who are here in Glasgow, the friendliest city on earth, they have opened their arms for more than 25,000 delegates from 200 countries, all focused on shaping the future of clean energy. And that's what we do at EPRI. Our focus is work together with 400 energy companies around 40 countries to shape the future of clean energy. And as we are looking into shaping the future of clean energy, I think we see a clear pathway, and it is achievable on some of the more ambitious goal that has been set for 2030. The NDCs that are coming out from a US perspective, our goal is 50 to 52% economy-wide reduction by 2030. And if we continue to do what we have done, but accelerated by 3x through more wind, more solar, grid modernization now really needs to be implemented. We need to redesign the grid, rethink the grid, and that's already happening. And electrifying of transportation. And I just heard that in the UK, 20% of the new cars that are sold, 20% are EV and PHEV. So if we continue to do that, we will get to 50% reduction economy-wide. We most likely will get to 70-75% reduction on the electric sector in the US. But how do you take that 50% and go to net zero by 2050 in almost only 20 years? That was a genesis to create a very complementary program, Low Carbon Resource Initiative. I'd say if you want to know about Low Carbon Resource Initiative, just Google it and you'll get to our website. It is 18 months in its making. Its focus is to accelerate technologies that will help us to cross the bridge from 50 to 100. And the technologies that we are looking into are, as I call it, how do you effectively, affordably create and scale up clean molecules that are produced from clean electricity? So clean molecules would help us to replace fossil fuel down the road. The challenge that we have is we're trying to change the engine of a plane that is running 80% full of fossil fuel today while the plane is still flying. That's what we got to do. To do that, we need to figure out what are the options for natural gas, what are the options for petroleum? What are the options for running our gas turbines, maybe on something else? And that really was the catalyst that has become now the largest collaboration in the world among utilities, electric utilities, gas utilities, technology companies. It's called Low Carbon Resource Initiative. Advance the technologies that will not only help electric sector to go from 80 to 100, but I was at an Accenture panel with World Economic Forum, industrial clusters. Industry in 30 years ago, they have increased their emission, the industrial sector, by 30%. So it's actually gone up 30%. What do you do with the industrial sectors? The work at LA Basin on an industrial cluster, you can think the future energy company will not only be providing electricity to light your life, but also making alternate fuels that will help the industrial sectors to decarbonize. So that's the opportunity, Pedro, that was the heart behind LCRI, or Low Carbon Resource Initiative, which has become the largest collaboration of energy companies. And we are ready for the infrastructure bill in US from European Union, the Horizon program, to bring in $10 to $20 billion to scale up these technologies through demonstration. So that's what LCRI is about, Pedro.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Arshad, and I'm really pleased that our company was one of the early sponsors of that. It's very important work. Now, there's also very important work going on at AES, Leo, and really have a lot of respect for your company. AES has been a good partner to our company at the utility level with significant development in Southern California. Why don't you share a bit about what's going on your side of the world?
Thanks, Pedro. Very happy to be here. And I feel the goals of COP26 are so connected with AES's mission. The history of our company, we were founded 40 years ago with improving lives as a core element to the purpose of the company. And in the beginning of that long history, that meant bringing power to developing nations. And the most recent iteration of our mission is to accelerate the future of energy together. And we really love the word accelerate because we don't want to be just a participant in the market, but we want to be innovating. We want to be driving the industry forwards in different ways. And we also use the word together because we want to do that together with our customers and communities and stakeholders. So I feel deeply connected with the goals of this conference. If you look at the AES journey, we went through a 10-year process to transform our company, to create our climate commitments. We were one of the first companies to issue a TCFD report and set these goals very early on. But today we're leading in renewables and new technologies. So we're signing 5 gigawatts of contracts for new renewables to be built every year. We are the global leader in energy storage, both through AES and through we are founding investor Influence. That's the global leader today that IPO'd early in the year. And the way we think we contribute to this future is, number one, transitioning our own company, which we've already done over the last 10 years. Number two is through these partnerships with customers. So even yesterday, we announced a partnership with Microsoft to provide around-the-clock renewables to their data center operations, so decarbonizing actually the whole load of their data centers. Number three, in new technology. So Fluence is an example, but we actually have a whole innovation operating system at AES where we launch new startups and fund new startups that can be accelerated in this future. And the last one, I think, is on the policy side. I think we all have a role to play to get governments and other stakeholders to also move at the same pace that we want. So I'm very proud to be here and to be part of AES in this journey.
Well, that's fantastic, and it really is a great story globally. Your last point on policy is so key. Our company recently put out a white paper called Mind the Gap, and looking at California, and one of the sound bites out of that is that the state's done a great job over the last, since 2005, decreasing carbon emissions by 1% per year, while the economy grew by 3%. But if the state's going to make its 2030 waypoint reduction that's in statute of a 40% reduction from 1990 levels, it needs to quadruple that rate to 4.1%. And so that bringing together of technology and policy is just critical. And one of the examples of that coming together technology and policy is the funding that goes on at DOE, right? So I know that DOE has had a series of Earthshot initiatives that it's launched for hydrogen and for energy storage. And be interesting to get into how you view that these fit into the broader picture of clean energy technology. And Arshad, I know this is close to you, close to LCRI, but also some of the broader work that EPRI does. Any thoughts on that DOE approach?
I think the DOE approach, just look at their Sunshot and some of the other initiatives they have launched. What they predicted the cost of battery would be, what they predicted the cost of solar would be. We're actually surpassing that. And it's DOE taking a leadership to take technologies that are coming from startup and national labs, but actually scaling them up. And that's really where LCRI fits in, because you got 50 energy companies. And we have an opportunity for hydrogen, liquid ammonia, alternate fuels, low carbon fuels, to really scale up. Yesterday, at the industrial cluster, there may be $10 billion available on creating at least 10 industrial clusters. And industrial clusters are industries that would use steam, hydrogen, electricity produced from clean sources to decarbonize. And if you can decarbonize, if you can create 10 industrial clusters similar to what the UK is doing, you could reduce industrial emission by 10%. The key thing about this COP that we see is different is, yes, electric sector needs to lead. Yes, electric sector is the one that has started in a glide path, in some cases pretty sharp glide path, but focus now also needs to be on the other remaining sectors, transportation, industry, because they're representing almost 60% of the emission. So I think that's a change that we see in the partnership between energy companies producing the fuel that industries will use. I think that's a great opportunity.
And when you peel back the onion on that and you look at the suite of tools, I know you've had a lot of focus on hydrogen specifically, right, within LCRI. Be curious how, Arshad, from that work's perspective, you're seeing that hydrogen opportunity. And Lee, I'll turn to you. How do you see that fitting? Is it it's a part of the suite? Is it a different form of storage? How does it fit in with some of the work you're doing on storage and renewables? But let me start, Arshad, with the LCRI connection too.
I think hydrogen is one of the options. The reason there is so much interest in hydrogen now is because hydrogen has application in several industries. If you want to do green steel, hydrogen is the way to go. Mm-hmm. If you really want energy storage, think about a future in 2040, 2035. In US, let's say we got 1,000 gigawatt of wind and solar. Let's say electrification of transportation and heat pump has increased the electric load. You now need storage that are months, not even days. What's the best way to store energy for a month or 2 months? We do that with natural gas today in natural gas caverns. Hydrogen could be the one, that long-term storage. So I think that's where the interest is, but we got to be careful. That's one of the tools in the toolbox. It is not the only tool in the toolbox. We need to aggressively move. There's a lot of work going on advanced nuclear. There's a lot of work going on, has to go on carbon capture and storage. 80% of world's energy today is fossil fuel. 80% of world's energy in 1990 was fossil fuel. Just think of that reality of that. And we have added more than 1,500 gigawatt of wind and solar over the last 15 years. But the percent of fossil fuel is still the same. So I think the opportunity for hydrogen, carbon capture, advanced nuclear, synthetic fuel, biofuel, that's really where the low carbon resource initiative is focusing.
Let me turn to you.
I think we at AES really believe that the future is all electric. So to pick up on what Arshad was saying, to simplify, maybe 1/3 of the global emissions are from the power industry, 1/3 transportation, 1/3 other. So if you really want to decarbonize everything, you need to double or triple the electric load. So in that world where everything is electric, I think we need, number one, a massive amount of batteries in the grid. And these batteries are going to manage the intraday or even intra-week seasonality of the renewables. So a world that is 100% renewable would have a mega amount of batteries out there. But then secondly, you have the interseasonal problem. So between summer and winter, these renewables are going to be generating maybe 20% or 30% less. And to Arshad's point, that intra-seasonal problem, you need some renewable fuel to bridge that. And we think that hydrogen is probably going to play that role in the future. So getting this technology to scale, we think is the only way to get there, because otherwise you would have to overbuild the renewables by 20 or 30%, and you don't want to do that. But we're happy to be playing in all of these. We have pilot projects in hydrogen, that we have a partnership we announced in Chile in hydrogen, and we're the leaders in energy storage. So we really think that all the stakeholders waking up to the need for this innovation and these new technologies is key.
Well, let me build on that point, Leo, and go back to you. AES has a global platform. You just described global projects. To what extent are you pursuing those as AES working in country A versus country B versus how much opportunity are you seeing for actual international partnerships, whether it's for deployment, whether it's for testing facilities? What role does that opportunity for partnership play in your view?
I think the fact that AES is international is a huge plus for us, because in some countries, we are such a big player that we can establish a partnership with the government and help drive the transition in that country in a very cohesive and progressive way. If you see the partnership we have with the government of Chile, that's an example where we basically agreed on a plan to decarbonize the sector together with the other players, and that has been very successful. But being an American company, we can also bring these leading technologies from the US to these countries. So we're bringing energy storage everywhere across the world. And the idea that you need to pilot a new technologies, for us being an international company, is also a plus. Under our innovation operating system, we call it type 1, type 2, type 3 innovation. And the type 3 is really when you launch new businesses. And the fact that we can be a global company and launch a new business and test these new technologies in different places or different grids that have different characteristics is huge for innovation.
So you mentioned the project in Chile a couple of times. A little bit more nuts and bolts on that. We'll give a deeper description of it.
Yes, we made an announcement early in the year that we're piloting a project in Chile. Unfortunately, we can't share a lot of information about it, but it's basically hydrogen creation, ammonia project. And we think that the ammonia is one use for hydrogen where you're going to export and use for in the agriculture sectors and others. But we have other pilots in the US that are also focused on transportation and other uses. So we think that this hydrogen chain has actually to decarbonize several different parts of the industrial chain.
That's really exciting. And Arshad, I know that EPRI has also a couple of interesting projects around hydrogen accelerators at a more local level.
Well, let me talk about, everybody talks about demonstration and scaling up. Where does EPRI fits in? Where we fit in is, let's make sure there's demonstrations that are happening in 30 different places. We are learning and sharing the results across broader industry and really bringing the engineering acumen, because these are new things. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in New York, NYPA, New York Power Authority, one of our public power authority. They have a facility in Brentwood where they had a gas turbine. It's an LM6000. We partnered with GE. That's 12 years old. So it's an existing gas turbine, operational gas turbine. And we are now starting to bring hydrogen mixed blending with natural gas on that existing turbine, starting from 5% going up to 30%. Now, that's the first in the US. It's not just a demonstration. We got to figure out what happened to NOx. We got to figure out what happens to flame temperature. We have to figure out how you can go from 30 to 50. That's really the opportunity that technology demonstration provides. Otherwise, a pilot will just remain a pilot. So I think that's where we see the opportunity. And just, I also can say something about, you will hear today or tomorrow, keep your ears out. There is an exciting opportunity on the startup companies will play a huge role in this ecosystem. So we have an Incubate Energy Lab that is really a conduit for startup companies to engage with the electric utility industry. We now are going to be launching an accelerator, partnering with not just electric and gas utilities, but partnering with Shell, partnering with City of Houston, with some major accelerators, and we'll be launching a low carbon fuel accelerator that's focusing on primarily hydrogen, liquid ammonia, electrolyzer, and those technologies. So hang in there. We'll be announcing it over the next couple of days.
All right, so that's just a teaser.
That's a teaser.
All right, so everybody will have to stay tuned on this. So look, a lot of exciting stuff going on, but I'm sure it's not all, roses. There's probably some challenges there. What do you see as some of the key obstacles to be overcome?
I'd say the key obstacle is this decade, we got to do the things that we need to do while we're doing the innovation. So first, we need to just reimagine the grid. We are already reimagining, but there's significant investment that policymakers, regulators will have to think that grid is you mentioned 100% electrification, Leo. The way we see it is, we don't say it's 100%. You say right now in the world, 20% of the energy that we use is electricity. We fully believe that in the next 20 to 30 years, it will double, 40 to 45 to 50%. What happens to the other 50%? Well, electricity then creates another fuel that helps the other 50%. We call it indirect electrification. You cannot have the electric sector play that leading role by not reimagining and investing the grid, not just modernizing the grid. The one thing we haven't talked about enough in this COP26 is you will need a grid that is a lot more resilient than what it is today. And so those are, I think, bigger challenges in addition to low carbon fuels.
I fully agree. And just in the California example, we see peak demand going up 40% and total sales going up 60% by 2045. So funny you use the words reimagining the grid. We had a white paper that we put out at the end of 2020 with that title because we do see a significant redesign of the grid that is needed. But it's an exciting opportunity. Leo, I'm going to turn to you for your view on challenges and let the audience know that we're open to taking some questions after Leo answers this. So Leo, what do you see as the obstacles?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the confluence we've seen around clean energy, we've never seen this before. And the demand from customers on clean energy is huge. If you think of just the US, we probably went from 30 gigawatts a year to 60 gigawatts a year in one year, from last year to this year. And I see a few challenges. First is the constraints around land, around communities, around supply chain. Supply chain is constrained in every industry, is constrained in our industry as well. So that's one side. And the second side is, if you look at the countries that had problems rolling out too many renewables, like Germany and others, they weren't planning for an hourly goal. They were just planning for volume. So just add wind, just add solar. And when you think about the RE100, which are the customers that committed to 100% renewable energy, they were about 100 2 years ago, but now they're 300. But they're still volume goals. So it's procure solar, procure wind. Now we're seeing a movement in the past 6 years where customers are moving to an hourly goal. So we want to actually decarbonize every hour of the year. And we think that the more stakeholders and governments and regulators that embrace this, I think the better we'll plan the system forwards, because then we're going to incentivize new technologies. We're going to incentivize energy storage rather than just volume.
I really agree with both of your comments, and I'll take a license here to add a couple. Two things that I'd say. One is from a policymaker perspective, we need to move from pilots to big scale, and then we'll mean taking some risk. But if we really have the time urgency that I think the globe has, we need to be moving faster, bigger. And there will be some mistakes along the way. The other piece is that the whole planning process that then translates into technology commitments needs to be reshaped from one that is looking at what's the expected, middle of the road outcome to one that's actually planning for the extremes. Because the reality is that climate change isn't just about global temperatures rising on average. It's about significant volatility in outcomes. We're seeing that in California with wildfires, with extreme heat. We're seeing that across the West. We're seeing, more devastating hurricanes and more frequent hurricanes in the Southeast US and other parts of the world. So really you need to be changing from planning for the middle to planning for the tail, because that tail's showing up a lot more often. Well, let me see if there are any questions in the room here. Otherwise, I can keep on going. Is there one? Let's. Do we have an extra mic? Or?
Thank you. Thank you for this. It's a great conversation. I was just going to ask, could you talk about the capital needs and where are the gaps? What needs to happen for this, reimagined future of the grid?
So I don't know if you heard the question. The question is, talk about the capital needs and how much is needed for this reimagined future.
I'll take a shot at it. US perspective, we clearly see in order to meet the US NDC of 50 to 52% economy-wide, that's an acceleration of 3x. So the capital investment that has been made by the industry may not be needed to be 3x times, but it would be at least 2x. So that's where the capital investment is needed. And if there is regulatory and policy support, that capital will be available.
I think from my perspective, if you think of the world needing 700 gigawatts of renewables, that's 700 billion. We see the capital available and willing to invest in the developed countries. So in the low risk environment, a lot of capital, financial institution increasing the amount of capital that goes to ESG. But if you look at the fringe economies, if you look at Africa, if you look at the poor nations in Latin America, in Asia, I think it's still an issue. I think there's still not a mechanism for this, the level of scale deployment that we need in these fringe nations.
You know, I think you both provided some really good broad picture perspectives. I'll give you maybe a more local number, but it's still a big one because it's for the world's 5th largest economy. Our estimate of the need in California from now to 2045, just for the 80 gigawatts of renewables that will need to be added at the bulk power level, 30 gigawatts of storage, and then the associated grid needs is $250 billion. Right? But when you think about it, that's only part of the decarbonization need for capital, because then it's also the capital needed in specific other industry sectors as they put in the technologies to electrify. And it's decisions that need to be made by individual consumers, right? When they're making the choice between a combustion engine car versus an electric car, or maybe something less sexy. I was joking in an earlier panel, people don't think that much about water heaters, but the next time you need to replace your water heater, is it fossil fuel or is it electric, right? Or putting in a heat pump. And so think about the capital deployment that will be needed across the economy through the end use customers to make that happen. And how do we help not only those who can afford it today, but those who need to afford it? They need a little help. Low income, disadvantaged customers, they need help with the transition there. Yes, question over here. You know, I'll just repeat it. So let me just shout it out.
Increasing the level, the number of the wind power and solar power, I think it's important to think about related to the safety of the energy and the grid. Nowadays in Brazil, we operate with hydro and the thermal in the bases, provided the safety of the grid. And what do you think about the future with the increasing the number of the power, solar power, and the safety of the grid?
Let me make sure that I got the question right so I can repeat it for folks online. But how do we think about the resiliency needs for the grid as we go to a system that has more solar, more wind, more variable resources? What's needed in order to maintain the level of reliability needed? And by the way, I'd expand your question a little bit, because I would say that the level of resiliency needed today is probably not the entire level needed tomorrow, since tomorrow we'll be looking at an economy that is much more deeply electrified. So your thoughts on the question?
It's not a great question. It's not just a resiliency need of the future, but we have that need today. We have a planning process that is based on the resources that we have used in the last 30, 40 years. That planning process, the way we think about resource adequacy, the way we think about how we plan and operate the grid will have to change. So for example, what you're seeing in Europe, what you saw in Texas, we have to make sure we are taking those extreme weather events in our planning process. It can be discounted. If you look at what's happening in other parts, wind and solar, it's still a relatively new technology. We need to look at, just like a hydro, we know that 1 in a 10 year, you may have a drought and you may not have the hydro. So we have alternate plans. We're seeing you may have a drought in wind. That's a 1 in a 10 year event. We just haven't done that type of analysis, I think, globally, to look at planning an energy system with new resources and factoring in extreme weather events that are going to be more frequent and are going to be more damaging. So I think that's the biggest challenge, and that's not a 2040 challenge. That's something that we got to do right now as we bring more wind and more solar, because wind and solar is going to happen at absolutely 3x to 4x times in the next 10 years. However, wind and solar is one of the tools in the toolbox. Nuclear has to happen. Carbon capture and storage has to happen, because if we don't do that, then we'll clean the electric sector, but we will not touch the other sectors. There are two countries, France and Canada. 20 years ago, they were 90% clean. But in the last 20 years on the transportation and industry side, nothing has happened. So I think that's the opportunity we have to make sure we rethink planning and operation of the energy grid in new ways.
Well, Leo, you're operating a big fleet with those kinds of resources. What's your perspective as an operator?
So I think there's two elements in my mind. One is the storage technology, so battery storage deployment in scale, and the renewable fuels like we talked about. So that's one. These have to be mature, cheap enough, and deployed in scale. But I think the second one is the intelligent grid. So when you think about it, today, if I file for an interconnection process in the US, it will take years for me to hear back whether that project's feasible or not. And if you think of other networks like the internet, you connect immediately. You know if there's bandwidth or not. If you want to get a phone line, it's immediate. So if we had an AI-enabled grid that provides that signal to the market immediately, I think that would also make things different because you'd place the resources exactly where they're needed. We have an effort together with other companies with the X Moonshot Factory side of Google to develop this intelligent grid. But I think without this component, you'll still be underutilizing your assets because you're going to be going through a manual process on how you plan for the system.
Thanks, Leo. See another hand up here. Just shout it out. We'll repeat it for the audience.
What about the systems, the generation needed, the investments which is needed? What about the actions that we need to do to our customers to make sure that we're reducing costs and we have that mutually
So make sure I got the question right. My hot water heater comment made you think about demand response, and therefore, what actions do we need from customers, not only in terms of the contribution to power needs, but also thinking about cost as well.
It's a totally different area, but very important area because load flexibility will have to be a key part in addition to energy storage. And load flexibility, typical home in US, if you do the right thing, you can get 2 to 4 to 6 kilowatt of load flexibility. And that has a value that the customer can accrue. You mentioned about just transition. An average US household, $45,000 annual income, is spending $4,500 on energy and $4,500 on capital and O&M for energy related things. Imagine if their water heater breaks and they can get a water heater at $1,000 cheaper because that's the $1,000 value that the grid can monetize. So now you are doing a transition where that average low income customer is actually getting a water heater that is part of the clean energy economy at a reduced cost. That's the greatest opportunity we have of this transition is if we do it right, we will reduce the overall energy cost. And this is, I've heard Pedro challenges Arshad, that's you having your, eating your cake and having it too. I said, yeah, if you do it right, if you electrify transportation, that $4,500 on an average that you spend every year, that average customer, they'll save a net $1,000. Then if you can get money on your water heater as you have to replace, your air conditioners that you have to replace, or a 240 volt charger that will be a managed charger, that's another stream of revenue for that average customer. And we can make this transition and actually make energy more affordable for customers.
Yeah, and actually, let me chip in here. The analysis we've done in our Pathway 2045 white paper for California showed just that, right? That there's an investment required up front, but we see the average customer in 2045 actually spending 1/3 less on their total energy bill. Add up electricity, gasoline, petrol, natural gas, 1/3 less. And the reason is it's the physics behind electric technologies. They're just simply a lot more efficient. More efficient to have an electric motor moving a wheel than it is to have a combustion engine burning up gasoline and losing a significant amount of the energy to heat and to friction. So 1/3 less, that's a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but we need help from government to monetize some of that pot of gold in the form of incentives to help people be able to afford the new technologies today.
And just add to that 1/3, it's not just the energy fuel cost, there's an energy service cost.
Right.
If you buy a car for $15,000, you'll be spending $15,000 over 10 years on O&M and gasoline. The O&M cost of cars can easily come down 1/3 or half with electric vehicle. So you're saving on total energy services, which is fuel and the capital and O&M of energy. So I think we need to talk more about that. I don't see that being addressed in a clear way, that how this could be an affordable transition, especially if the utilities take action and actually work with the customers that need the help the most, the disadvantaged community, the $45,000 income average family of 4 community.
Leo, thoughts on the demand side?
Yeah, I think that's a critical component, the customer behavior. We're a strategic investor in Uplight, which is the leader in digital customer engagement in the US today, has 80 utility customers. And their vision is really to affect customer behavior to allow more renewables to be deployed. So they do things like control smart thermostats and things like that. So I think that's a huge element of it. But the other element is also the CNI world. So if you think of data centers today, they're 3% of global energy demand already, and these cloud businesses are growing 50 to 100% per year. So and with the digital transformation of every sector, this is going to be bigger and bigger. Some of these players are already working on this, but if you can actually change the load or the data consumption between different areas based on the amount of renewables that are in the grid in that area, that's another big way. So I think customer behavior, both on the residential side and on the CNI side, are another huge component. And then lastly, once we have a massive fleet of electric vehicles out there, everyone has a personal battery. How that battery works with the grid is also going to be a huge component.
Any other questions in the room? Shout it out.
Discussion so far, interest around upscaling from pilots, the focus on the upscale. I want to know how much coverage the pilots we have in the fringe economies. See Africa. If we're talking about leaving the pilots and upscaling, have we broadened the pilots?
And so let me make sure I got the question right. As we talk about going from pilots and upscaling those to major projects, how much of that is happening not only in the, say, the U.S. economy, but in developing economies and other country economies? Thoughts on that, Leo? I think it's right down your alley here.
Yes. No, I'm happy to talk about it. So I think in the fringe economies, the needs are very basic, right? I mean, we operate in a lot of fringe economies, but we operate in a lot more in the past. But I think there's also an opportunity, which is to leapfrog certain things. So the grids in the developed economies, they were not built planning for renewables or batteries. So it's very similar to telecom, because in telecom in Africa, you basically leapfrogged the wires and went directly to cellular. So I think here is the same way, where in places where you actually have to still build the grid, it's the idea of building it in an intelligent way, planning for renewables and batteries in the future. So I think that's the key opportunity.
No, I think a great example of what ESCOM, one of our members, South African utility, they're doing. They've already announced closure of 22,500 megawatt of coal by 2035. Well, in order to do that, and in order to make the transition just, you have to bring in those demonstrations, repurpose those coal plants with solar, they're even looking at advanced nuclear. And I think the opportunity for not just pilots, but full-scale demonstration in Africa. And I know USAID has a Power Africa program, and they're committing a lot of funds, and Europe is committing a lot of funds as well. So I'm very optimistic that the demonstrations and projects will not just be limited to developed countries, but actually go to other countries that needs the most.
Well, I think we're getting close to out of time here, but I'm going to try and sneak in one more question. And that's, we spent most of our time here talking about technologies for climate change mitigation. We sort of skirted on adaptation by talking about making the technologies more resilient. But I think that was in the context of these mitigation technologies. If you broaden the aperture and think about the investment needed for broader adaptation, what are your thoughts there, and just the quick take on opportunities and challenges from a technology perspective?
So I think this topic is growing in the past few years, and I think it's been one of the main themes here at COP, which is great. But I think the investment in adaptation technologies also has to be massive. In the most optimistic scenarios, even if we assume you get to the 1.5 degrees that we've been discussing here, there's already, people talk about at least 500 million people that are going to be affected, even in the 1.5 degree scenario. So I think there needs to be a host of new technology developed in adaptation, and some of the companies that have just been focused on building things have also to migrate to that mentality.
Yeah, I think, Pedro, adaptation is the other side of the coin of decarbonization. We're putting a lot of focus on the decarbonization piece, we are starting to think about adaptation in a really serious way. And events like what happened in Texas, event like what happening in Europe, is clearly and in California, wildfire, is clearly showing us that we just can't, we got to act now on adaptation, and not even wait for 2040 for the weather pattern to change permanently.
And I think it's risky. You're right. We are seeing the wildfire risk in California and already have changed our planning and our investment to adapt to that. But we have a lot more coming, whether it's sea level rise, extreme heat, drought, flooding. And so this is a global issue. And fortunately, we have good global leaders who are thinking about both sides of the coin. So please join me in thanking Leo and Arshad for your thoughts, for the leadership of your organizations, and I look forward to continuing to work together to leave a better planet for our kids.
Thank you.